Welcome to the C tutorial series. I'm so glad you're here. Today we will learn how to use variables in C. So let's get started. I created a file called variables.c, and like with any C program, we're gonna start with the #include stdio.h, and then we will have a main function that returns 0. So let's create some variables. The first variable I'm going to create is just an integer. So an integer is a whole number, and I'm going to call this variable a. And on the next line, I'm going to set a equal to 5. And you can do both on the same line. For example, I'll create another integer b and set this equal to 4. I can also sum a and b, and I'll create another variable called sum and set this equal to a plus b. Now let's print this out. We're going to have a print function and say what the value of a is. And in order to do this, we need to do %d because d signifies an integer. So then after this, I'm going to do comma and then a. So it will replace the value of a, which is 5, with this %d, so it's going to print the value of a is 5. And now when I run this, it works. I can also do this for the sum and say the sum is, and then after the %d, I'll just say sum. And now when I run this again, it says the value of a is 5 and the sum is 9. So integers can be whole numbers, but there's also decimal numbers, and there are two types of decimal numbers. One is called float and the other one is called double. I'm going to create a float called decimal and set this equal to 5.4, and then I'm going to create a double, which is another decimal, and I'm also going to do 5.4. The main difference between a float and a double is that a double has double the precision. This means you can go twice as far after the decimal for a double compared to a float. And now let's print this out. We'll do printf, and we'll say the value of the float is, and this time it's not an integer, so we can't do %d. It is a float, so it is %f. And the value of the double is %lf. And then after this, we'll say decimal, which is a float, and then another decimal, which is for the double. Now we print this out. So we see there's 5.4 and then a lot of zeros after this. If we want to eliminate that, we can change this %f to %g, same for the %lf, and it will eliminate the unnecessary zeros at the end, so it's going to look better. And it's going to say the float is 5.4 and the value of the double is 5.4. We can also add integers and floats together. For example, I'll say the sum of int a and float decimal is %f. So this will return a float. And I'm going to pass in a plus decimal. And I'll run this and I'll get 10.4. If I wanted to, I could also eliminate the decimal point by creating an integer called int and float and setting this equal to a plus decimal. And now I'll just copy this line and then I'll paste this with int and float, and then I'll change the %f to %d because it is now an integer, and now when I run this, I get 10. So we can leave the decimal by putting it in the float format, or eliminate the decimal by putting it into an integer format. Now that we know how to create variables for numbers, let's do it for letters and strings. So if we want to create a variable for a letter, it's called Char, C-H-A-R, and I'll call this variable letter, and set this equal to the letter A. And we need to put the letter A in quotations. And then I'll create a print statement, and I'll say the letter is, and then I'll do %C for character. And now when I run this, I get the letter is A because we set the character A equal to letter. What if I want to do a word? Well, that's called a string. So there's multiple ways to do this. So a string is just a set of characters. So I'll create char name, and then I'll create an array. We'll talk about arrays in more depth later, but think of it now as just a placeholder for lots of letters. And I'll set name equals Jonathan, and I'll print my name is %s, and %s is a string that is multiple characters, and it is assigned name. So now when I run this, I get my name is Jonathan. We can also put a number in here. For example, Jonathan is 8 letters, so let's see what happens when we put an 8 in here. I'll run this again, and as you can see here, it doesn't work properly. We have an E at the end. Why is this? Because at the end of every string is a \0. That means the string has ended. So the name Jonathan is actually 9 characters, not 8, because of the \0. I'll run this again, and this time there is no E at the end. It just says my name is Jonathan, so this works properly. And that's an introduction of how to use variables in C. Next, we will introduce user input and show how users can interact with C programs. Make sure to follow along with this video series by subscribing and hitting the notification bell, or by clicking on the next video so that you can expand your knowledge about C. Thank you so much, and as always, I can't wait to see you next time.